Here we go. You remember where we left off? We left off with tragedy. There was a tremendous war at Mount Gilboa. And at that war, the Philistines of the Gaza Strip came up and defeated the armies of Israel so powerfully and thoroughly that the armies of Israel fled. There were mass deaths on the battlefield. And King Saul and his three sons, including Jonathan, died in battle. It was just a horrible, horrible moment in Jewish history. Like October 7th, if we had a calendar of today's nature and we had that date on it, it would be a day of national mourning. The first king of Israel was killed in battle. Terrible death. He had to actually kill himself. We learned that because his second in command, or his bearer of arms, actually would not kill him. But after seeing Saul fall on his own sword, or as we learned last week, according to the Midrash, he kind of cut himself in the carotid artery of his neck. His bearer of arms then killed himself. And the next day of battle, as the Philistines surveyed the dead on the battlefield, they found Saul, Shaul HaMelech, and they took him and his three sons, whose bodies they found, and they beheaded all of them. And then they took what was left, their torsos, and they nailed them to the wall. And then at night, people from Yavesh Gilad, who were an interesting kind of outlier Jewish tribe, to the best of my further study, a lot of stories about them, but I want to stay as much on today's topic. But Yavesh Gilad and those people, a lot of interesting stories about something that happened in War of Benjamin later on, all kinds of stuff. Saul had come to their rescue when Nachash the Ammonite had threatened to massacre all of them, or alternatively leave them alive if they agreed to submit to having an eye plucked out of every single man. And not knowing what to do, how they're going to stand up to such a man, how they're all going to avoid partial blindness and torture, Saul came to their rescue and saved them in the battle that cemented his role as leader of the Jewish people and the first king of Israel. And now that he was dead and his body was nailed to a wall, as were those of his sons, they risked their lives in the middle of the night, furtively taking down those bodies. And we learned they set the bodies on fire, which was actually the most dignified thing to do, given the terrible, terrible destruction of the bodies. And this is what Hamas did. It's amazing. It's amazing. Thousands of years later, they come from Gaza and they behead Jews and they burn them and they massacre them so badly that the people of Zaka cannot identify them and identify the torsos with the heads so they can be buried together. It's unbelievable. And the people of Yavesh Gilad took down the bodies. So where was David during all this? David was in Tziklag. David was in Tziklag. We were learning David had gone to war against the Amalekites. First, he had gone to war against all kinds of local tribes and nomads. And that's how he supported. They would support themselves that way. And we've learned many times how he was far enough away from the capital city of Gath that the king of the Philistines didn't know what was going on down there. And so he was based in Tziklag. And then we learned that on one sortie, they came back and they found that Amalek had come and taken all their wives and all of their children and all of their belongings and all of their sheep and cattle. And David, we learned this, went with his 600 men, 400 into battle, 200 men watching the supplies, and they destroyed Amalek, and they brought back the women and children alive, together with not only their own sheep and cattle, but the Amalekite sheep and cattle. And now he's back in Tziklag, and there's no television, and there's no phones, and there's no anything, so he doesn't know what's going on. All the way up there, just knows something's going on. But he doesn't know what's going on. it works both ways. He's been able to do all the stuff he's been doing down there because the king didn't know what was going on here. So if the king didn't know what's going on here, David didn't know what's going on there. He only knew that they were going to battle because the king had asked him to be part of, with his 600 men, to be part of his special guard. But other Philistines had said to the king and pressured him and said, you can't do that. We can't trust this guy. They actually were right. And David thereby was assisted to avoid having to be in the impossible position of being second in charge with the king of the Philistines killing Jews or turning. It would have been impossible. He was blessed that people didn't trust him. Baruch Hashem. Thank God. So that's the background that we come to. Vayihi acharei mot Shaul, and it was after the death of King Saul. By the way, Steve Schwartz has now joined us, and our class tonight is devoted for a successful surgery for his wife tomorrow, a shoulder surgery. May the surgery be successful, and may the zechus, the merit of our Torah learning right now, accrue to the way God blesses your wife tomorrow. May she have refuah shalema, and may her shoulder be strong, so for many more years to come, may you be able to lean on it in times of need. Vayihi acharei mot Shaul v'David shav me'akot et Amalek. So it's now after the death of Shaul, and David, he doesn't know from nothing, as we say in Brooklyn. He's returned from slaughtering the Amalekites, right? He went back to Amalek. Remember how he found a servant who had worked for an Amalekite, and it told him who and what and where. And so David has now returned from the Amalekite zone, where he's gone, and he's attacked them. And he's killed them. He's come back. And actually, they're pretty happy right now because they're running among all these crazy tribes. Who needs them? And now they're back in peace in Tziklag. And they're celebrating. They got their sheep and cattle back. They got the other sheep and cattle. They got back the wives and kids. They're celebrating. All right, great. Vayeshev David b'Tziklag yamim shnayim. And David continued sitting in Tziklag for 2 more days. The rabbis comment on it. Rabbis comment on everything we've learned. The rabbis asks because they love Torah, and they love every word of Torah, and they're always trying to figure out, is there a reason that an additional word appears here that we don't need to know? Does it matter after he came back that he stayed 2 more days before he did his next thing? Who cares? He stayed 2 more days. All right, I guess you could say after a successful, he's got everybody back, he could have said, okay, everybody, let's go for the next one. Like Lahavdil. I mean, it's Lahavdil, but it makes sense to me in my crazy mind. So Lahavdil, when I was an attorney, all right? So when I was an attorney, I was in litigation, and the most important thing in litigation are when cases go to trial. 99% of cases never go to trial. You never hear about most cases. They settle out of court. Once in a blue moon, they go to trial. Let's say there's a win. So what is it? How does everybody celebrate? They take the rest of the day off. And the Jew goes home and learns Torah, and the rest of them go and get drunk. They get together at a bar. And the next day, they're sober, and I'm sober. I know Torah, and they know Jack Daniels. So, or Maker's Mark. So, all right, that's the difference. But then we go back to work. It's not like you win a case on Tuesday and, okay, I'll be back on Friday. I'm taking 3 days off. Nothing doing. You got to bill your hours. especially if you're an associate. A partner can get lost and come up with an excuse. An associate, like a bimmy like me, I have to show up. Okay? No such thing, you won the case. There's always another case. And to win. The good news is we always win. Okay. So the question of the rabbis is, in this is like law. You don't take 2 days off. You have to make a living. You have to go out. So the rabbis ask, what's doing? So the rabbis point to Devarim, Deuteronomy, 5th book of the Torah, chapter 20. Devarim Chaf. The rabbis say, it says in the Torah, in God's holy word, that is God's word, the Nevi'im, the prophets that we learn, are books that were written under divine inspiration. The 5 books of Moses, the Torah, Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those books, we believe, are literally God dictating words to Moses. And Moshe Rabbeinu then took dictation like a secretary. And consequently, the rabbis look to sources in the Torah whenever they're trying to figure something out. And they say David probably was following the Torah, chapter 20 of Sefer Devarim. Ki tatsur el ir yamim rabim lehilachem aleha letafsa. When in your war against the city, you have to besiege it. I translate. If you're new, you'll get used to my criticizing the translations of Sepharia. Terrible translations. And that's what I'm here for. Ki tatsur el ir, when you lay siege to a city, the key words, Yamim Rabim, many days. Lilachem aleha letafsa. The rabbis say that's what was going on. He stayed 2 days to fulfill the Torah's concept that when you go to war, your war should be many days. You don't have a one-day war. If you're successful in one day, you should remain at least another day. Okay. Vayehi bayom hashlishi, now it's the 3rd day. V'hinei ishba min hamachane me'im Shaul. And a man comes running into the Tziklag camp of David, where they're still celebrating. But he's running from the battlefield up in Mount Gilboa. So he's had a long, long run. Let's take a look at that run again. That was from Mount Gilboa all the way to Tziklag. That's a good solid run. Okay? That's marathon quality. So he shows up at the battlefield of David from the Saul battlefield, Uvagadav Kruim, and his clothing are all torn. But Adamaro show he clearly is he's come out of Gettysburg. That's something many of you could maybe relate to better. Israelis would relate to other famous battles, the tragic battle of the 35, and other battles I could mention. Americans would relate. I'm not talking now about Pearl Harbor, which was a horrible, just a bombing. I'm talking about an old-fashioned war with swords and people getting cut up in torn garments, and like Gettysburg, Shiloh, Manassas, first Manassas, second Manassas. And so his garments are torn and he's a mess. On tomorrow's show, he's got earth all over his face, his head. He finds his way to David and he prostrates himself. David sees a guy, he doesn't know him he doesn't know this guy from nothing. David just, again, remember, they're celebrating. They just got everything back from the Amalekites. This is great. And he sees a guy showing, he doesn't know who this guy is. And it's not like this guy is wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis, okay, or he's wearing a black hat and a long beard like a chassid. He's just a guy who's all messed up. So David says, who are you? And the guy says, I've just fled from the Hebrew camp. Whoa, what's that all about? Vayomer love David mehaya davar hagednali. And David says, so what happened? Tell me. You know the word hagada, to tell. Davar is a thing. So what was the thing? What happened? What happened? Vayomer, and this messed up, messy, torn up guy, Asher nasa'am min hamilchama v'gam nafal min ha'am vayamutu. He says, oh my God, the nation. He doesn't say our nation. It's not clear whether he's Jewish. The nation, they fled in defeat, min hamilchama, from the battle. V'gam harbein nafal min ha'am, and a great many died from the nation. Vayamutu, and they died. V'gam Shaul v'Yonatan ben Ometu, and also Saul and Jonathan. There's a little bit of a hint going on here if you look carefully. He doesn't refer to him as Shaul HaMelech. He doesn't refer to him as King Saul. If I were going to David after having met with Joe Biden, I'd be saying, I just met with President Biden. I maybe I would say casually to a friend, if I knew Biden a lot. Like, let's say I'm Al Sharpton. So Al Sharpton went to the Obama White House 110 times. So maybe Sharpton would come back and say, I just was at Obama again, because he was there 110 times in the Obama White House. Open door. But if Dov Fischer met with Obama, I'd come back and I'd say, I just met with President Obama. Like, I just met with King Charles, and may he be well. It's interesting. He refers to Saul, not King Saul. He refers to Ha'am, the nation. He doesn't refer to Amenu, our nation. Okay, Ami, my nation. All right. So David says, what happened? Please tell me. And the guy says, oh, the nation fled in kind of wild disarray from the battlefield, and many died, and Saul and sons, and Jonathan, his son, died. Vayomer David el Hanar, and David undoubtedly is shaken. It doesn't say textually he's shaken. He's shaken. Okay? Vayomer David el Hanar, Hamagidlo, and David says to this young man, by young man, I want to say he's anywhere between 16 and 30. I'm not making a joke. That's what, he's not 80 or 90. He's a relatively young man comparatively. And on the other hand, right, what did they say in the 1960s? Never trust someone over 30. So figure up to 29. So somewhere between 16 and 29 falls into the category of young man. So you've got the image. So David says to this young man who's telling him this, Ech yadata, how do you know? Like, you're hoping it's not true. Have you been following, it's like the tragedy of the families of people who've been taken hostage by Hamas. And you're just hoping against hope that their hostage relatives are alive, especially if their children or their spouses or their parents, that they're alive, and then they get hints that they're not alive, that this one says, I think they fell and I think I saw them. And you're just, you hope against hope. Maybe you saw a different person. Maybe it wasn't my relative. Maybe there's a mistake. How do you know? And so he's asking that. How do you know? And the Nar, Vayomer Nar Hamagidlo, Eich Yadata, how do you know Ki Meit Shaul v'Yonatan beno, that Saul and his son died? Jonathan, Vayomer Nar Magidlo, and the young man who's been telling him says, Nikro Nikreti Bahar HaGilboa, I was at Mount Gilboa. You've been with me on this map a long, long time now. So he's at the heart of the battlefield, Gettysburg itself. He was at Mount Gilboa. V'hinei Shaul nishan al chanito, and I literally saw Saul leaning on his spear. In other words, I see the spear in him, penetrated him, unspoken blood. He's dead. And on top of it, all the chariots and horsemen of the Philistines were closing in. I got out of there, like, in other words, he's not saying I got out of there before they beheaded him. Okay, like, not really cool for me to hang around. I got out of here. I got out of there. But he's lying dead. He's bleeding. He's got a spear in his head or in his neck, and they're coming to kill him. By Ifenach Rav Bayarani, but you know what? He had a few breaths of life. Heck of a thing, because I had to get out of there. But he had some breaths of life. And he turned around to me. I was sure he's dead. And he saw me. I cry Eli, and he called out to me. But Omar Hineni. I said, I'm here. Bayomer Limiata. And he said to me, Who are you? But Omar Love, and I said to him, Amaleki Anochi. I am an Amalekite. Not I was, bad translation. I am an Amalekite. Like many of us now are proudly pronouncing in the face of all that anti-Semitic, pro-Arab stuff going on out there, Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew. And my Sunday class, I even played that part where one of our members spoke at a Santa Ana City Council meeting where they were discussing whether to pass a resolution on the Middle East because they have nothing else worrying them in Santa Ana, like in Chicago. In Chicago, the City Council of Chicago called for a ceasefire in the Middle East. If I were the Prime Minister of Israel, I would have responded by calling for a ceasefire in Chicago. So this guy says, I am an Amalekite. That's what he told Saul. Vayomer li miata, who are you? And I said to him, Amaleki Anochi, I'm an Amalekite. Vayomer Eli, and he said to me, he's like really dying. He's got, Amadna Alai u moteteni. Stand over me and finish it. Finish it. From the word mate. He asks to be killed. Ki achazani, because death is grip, he says. Ki achazani ha-shavetz, the agony of death. He feels it. Ki chol od nafshi bi, I'm barely alive, and death has now gripped him. He knows it. So the Amalekite tells David, so I stood over him and I killed him. Ki yadati, ki lo yichyach, because I saw he's not going to live. He's a dead man. Bo'ekach hanezer asher al rosho, and I then, after killing him, took the crown from off his head. If you've ever seen these movies or Shakespearean plays from the Middle Ages, the kings go into battle with their crowns. Henry the Fifth and Henry the Henry the First. Well, you can't go wrong. Henry, some Roman numeral. You know, in a kind of way, when it comes to Shakespearean plays, I mean, with all due respect, the Henrys are something like the Super Bowl. They're basically Roman numerals. So I guess with the Super Bowl coming, so I'm thinking Roman numerals. I gotta tell you, I'm feeling so bad for all these kids that come out of woke math in the public schools. So they can't even read Arabic numerals, much less Roman numerals. Poor kids, the Super Bowls, they follow football. They can't read, but they follow football. And now the Super Bowls, it used to be Super Bowl I, Super Bowl II, Super Bowl IV with a little bit of help. You could figure out it's 4, Super Bowl 5. Now it's getting into the 50s. Nebuch. I mean, it's not fair to these kids. Maybe it'll start a new movement from the kids themselves. We want to learn math, or at least Roman math. Next thing you know, they'll want to learn Latin. So he says, Ki achazani hashavatz, ki chol od nafshi bi. Death has gripped him. So the Amalekite says, I killed him. He's dying. I took the crown from his head. But it's Ada Asher al Israel, and he had a kind of like royal armlet on his arm, the symbol of who he is. But Aviemel Adoni Hena, and I brought all of it to you, to my Lord, you, my Lord. Well, David heard this by Chazek David b'vgadav v'yikraim. The minute David heard this, he tore his garments. He took hold of his garments. For those of you that know Jewish laws of mourning, God forbid, when a close relative dies, we tear the garment. When my father died, I tore my garment. When Ellen Zichrona Livracha, my father Zichrona Livracha, my mother Zichrona Livracha, Ellen Zichrona Livracha, when they died, I tore my garment, right? Kriya. People sometimes, they don't know how to do it. The rabbi comes. I'm not joking. The rabbi actually comes with a knife, and I'm not joking. I have a switchblade that I have only for the purpose of doing kriya. I mean, what is a rabbi going to do with a switchblade? In Brooklyn, we needed them. We in the Puerto Rican community sort of had an understanding that we all should have switchblades. The West Side, Leonard Bernstein, to him it was a musical. To us, the sharks and there was the sharks and the Jews. And so anyway, why would I have a switchblade? I have a switchblade because I was a brand new young rabbi. They don't teach us this stuff. They teach us learning. They teach us Torah. It's like law school. They teach you how to be a lawyer, and then you start practicing. And the first day, someone says, file a demurrer, and no one ever told you what a demurrer is. So in the same way, went to my first burial. I had my book, and they asked me, can you help us tear the garment? And there I am, standing there like a shmageki trying, like if you ever tried to open a thing of talenti or talenti, what's it called? Gelato. It is impossible to open. Talenti, Talenti. It is impossible. They make it impossible to open so that you have to keep buying more until you find one that you can open, and they cannot be opened. The stores, they just show the same ones. You cannot open a bottle. Anybody who's ever done that, Samson couldn't open it. So I'm trying to help them tear the garment. You got to come. So Kriya is an essential part of a rabbi's got to come with a switchblade to help people tear their garments. God forbid, God forbid, God forbid. And there are a series of purposes for which the garments are torn in Judaism. Let's take, if I could find it, yes, I can. I prepared for you the Talmud in Moed Katan, Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, folio 26a. And these are the purposes, these are the circumstances or instances for which garments should be torn and may not be repaired afterwards. I'm saving time by not going back over the previous section that talks about garments that may be ripped in mourning, but then may be repaired. The following are garments that must be torn in mourning and never may be repaired. One who rends his garments for the death of his father or for his mother, God forbid, God forbid, or for his rabbi who taught him Torah. Many of us have a rabbi. We may have many rabbis we learn from, but one rabbi in our life who we could say, he's my Rav, he's my Rebbe. He's my defining master of Torah. When he dies, we tear the garment. When that happened, when I heard my rabbi died about some 30 years ago, I remember I was in law school when I heard it, and I actually tore my garment, tore my shirt. I was in law school, and I wore that torn shirt the whole week of Shiva. I was allowed to go out. I didn't have to sit Shiva at home, but I wore a torn garment all week. Or for the Nasi. Now we don't have a Nasi. We have a prime minister. It's not the same. But in Talmudic times, they had a Nasi, who was the premier Jewish leader of the Jewish people, recognized like the prime minister of Israel. Half the country wants to throw him out. Right now, more than half, maybe 75% after October 7. But until October 7, 45% wanted to throw him out, and 50% wanted to keep him, and 5%, I don't know. But the Nasi is the recognized leader of the Jewish people. Or the president of the court, the Av Beit Din, the head of the Sanhedrin, when that would be like the chief justice of the United States Supreme Court. It would be like, you know how when the chief justice or any Supreme Court, like when Ruth Ginsburg died, they flew the flag at half-mast. When Scalia died, Antonin Scalia, they flew it at half-mast. So we tear a garment in Talmudic times when the head of the Sanhedrin died. And here's the one that just happened right now in our text. Or upon hearing evil tidings, V'al shemuot haraot, and upon hearing evil tidings, we tear a garment. Or hearing God's name, if God forbid, someone blasphemes, if you hear God forbid blasphemy, in other words, someone says something in the same sentence as the word God, referring in a terrible way to God, have to tear a garment. In fact, we're not even allowed to say God's name being, we're not allowed to use the word for that, cursed. Not allowed to say it. We say God's name being blessed, and we understand what the reference is. Birchat Hashem is not blessing. It means the opposite. You hear something like that. That happened once. In my life, I was watching TV, and I was watching Netflix, a particular comedian, and in his routine, he said something that I had to turn off the TV right away, and I had to tear a garment. Never listen to him again. Or when a Torah scroll has been burned, God forbid, in a war, Hitler burned, others have burned, terrorists have burned. There have been some cases where extremist secularist Jews in Israel have burned the Torah scroll. You have to tear your garment if you hear about it. And upon seeing the cities of Judea that were destroyed, or the destroyed temple of Jerusalem, there are people today who, when they visit for the first time in their lives the old city and go to the Kotel, they tear their garment. The first time in their lives. Not every time, but the first time. So those are some of the Kriyas. And number 6, it goes into deeper. That lists the ones, and then it asks, how do we know? What makes them special? From where do we derive that one must rend his clothing, rend meaning tear, for the death of the Nasi, president of the court, and upon hearing evil tidings? And here you go. Our source, and this is why I took us off here. As it says, I just read it to you. As it says in 2 Samuel, chapter 1, verses 11 to 12. Then David took hold of his clothes and rent them, tore them, and likewise all the men that were with him, and they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Shaul and for Yonatan and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by sword. And you see how these moments that we're learning, when you learn them deeply, you begin to see that they actually become, you may not have realized that it's not just a story unto itself, but it actually becomes a source of Jewish law. Rabbi, I have a question. Why do we tear the garment? The answer, if you had been in my Tuesday night class on February 6th, you would know. We learn it from 2 Samuel. David tore his garment by David took hold of his clothes and tore them. The Gam Kol Anashim Asherito, and so did all the men with him. Vayispedu vayivku hesped. A hesped is a eulogy. They eulogized. Vayivku, and they cried. They wept. Vayatsumu. You've heard of Tzom maybe, Yom Tzom Kippur, Tzom Gedalia, and Vayatsumu at Ha'arev. And they fasted until night. Many fast days begin in the day and they end at night. Only Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av start the night before and go 25 hours. So they fasted with torn Al Shaul v'al Yonatan beno v'al Am Hashem. They fasted and mourned for Jonathan, his son, for the nation of Israel. Al Beit Yisrael, for the house of God, the nation of God, the house of Israel. Kinaflu b'charav, because they fell at the sword. Let's learn one more Gemara that's pertinent here. I prepared for you. This is from Moed Katan 22b. Folio 22b. Chaf Bet Amud Bet. Mesechet Moed Katan. The Baraita teaches Al Kol Hamatin Kulan Korei Tefach. How much tearing of a garment? I mean, it's unclear. Well, nowadays it's clear because people have seen the rabbi help them do it. And how much tearing do you have to do until the rabbi stops? I mean, people don't know, and that's okay. You should never have to know, frankly. May you be blessed that you never have to know and never have to see it. But God forbid, people don't know. The rabbi needs to know. And how much tearing until the rabbi stops? So the rabbi knows you tear a tefach. How much is a tefach? A tefach, according to other Gemaras, a tefach is the width of 4 fingers. Some say 4 fingers together. Some say even spread. So this is longer. This is longer. This is less. I tend to go for less. I'm not looking to tear people's clothing. But because I'm not, well, I wasn't good at it, but after 40 years, I can tear garments with the best of them. So you aim for that. For a father, God forbid, or a mother, God forbid, now you have to do it very carefully. For a man, we do it near we start the garment. Well, I should actually show it. So for a man, God forbid, I don't know if their camera's picking it up. Denise will let me know what the camera's missing if I don't have it. Anyway, you start around here and you go till around the chest, till like just the beginning of the breast, the male breast. For a female, because of modesty issues, you got to stop before the breast. So the rabbi has to, it's very, very challenging. I must tell you, people don't understand, if you're an honest to goodness rabbi, which 99.9999% of my colleagues are, we don't look forward to that at all. There are a lot of people all around, and there are always 1 or 2 nudniks who are just looking for what to talk about next Shabbos at the table. And you kind of have to ask the lady, please, can you pull your blouse? So the rabbi then can take hold of the blouse like that, and you cut a little bit, and you don't cut too much. It's serious. It's a professional thing that nobody really recognizes. It's one of those things people take for granted, but it's a thing. So back to this Gemara, it talks about the 4 inches, the handbreadth, the tefach. So With the father and mother, you rent until he reveals the heart. Rabbi Abahu said, and how do we know? What is the verse that teaches that the rent must be a handbreath? Amar Rabbi Abahu, Mikra, what is the pasuk, the verse where in the Bible? The entire Bible. Does it say? So the answer is what we just read. It says David didn't just tear his garment, but he took hold of his garment. He did what I just showed you, actually. He pulled his garment out, and realistically, if you try it at home, this is something you can try at home, kids. If you try it at home, how much does a garment pull out? It depends on the garment. In those days, that garment, it would be about a handbreadth. And that's what we learned that from. So let's continue. Vayomer David el anar hamagidlo emizata. So David says to this young man, aged between, 16 and 30, 13 and 30, not younger than 13. What exactly are you from again? Vayomer ben ish ger Amaleki anochi. I am the son of an Amalekite ger. Now, there are two types of gerim. Ger literally means stranger. That's literally. But actually, there are two types of gerim. There's ger tzedek and ger toshav. And it doesn't tell us here which one. Ger tzedek is a convert. We don't use the term in everyday conversation, ger tzedek. We just refer to the person as a convert, and then we stop as soon as possible, even making reference to the person having converted. We learned that from like Ruth, who converted, and we don't refer to her as a convert, well, except when we're learning. You don't refer to a person as a convert. You don't bring up their past. It's no one's business. They shouldn't be judged based on their past. They're fresh, new, brand new souls. So, but a ger tzedek is a convert. A ger toshav is a completely different story. A ger toshav is a resident alien. There are two types of non-Jews under halakha, Jewish law, who may live in Israel at a time that there's the Holy Temple and the Jews are sovereign. At the time that the Jews are sovereign and there's a Holy Temple, you have 98% Jews. You don't really have a lot of non-Jews. You don't have the world like today where there's mass immigration, and like even 10 years ago, you didn't have all these Arab Muslims in France and Italy and Sweden or 20 years ago in Denmark and Holland. And it's only after all the craziness in Syria and other stuff and ISIS, they started running, and Europe decided, Angela Merkel and everyone decided we're going to take them in. But it used to be, when I was a kid, France was mostly French people. Spain was Spanish people. Italy was Italians. You have visitors, you have students, and you have some outsiders, but by and large, they even have laws like in France, you can't become a citizen if you're not French. It's limited to the French. A lot of countries you cannot, if you're not a citizen, you can't be. It's not like America where it's like football. If you can cross the finish line, just got to cross the end zone and give birth to your baby on the other side of the border. Mazel tov, you're an American. It's not like that. Now, in the Torah times of the Holy Temple, what you had was the Jews were 98% or so, and you had some non-Jews. And the halacha was you have to treat the non-Jews fine, of course. That's a ger toshav. The non-Jews have to agree to Jewish sovereignty. The non-Jews you have to be a non-Jew who says, I have no problem with you. I have no problem with this being a Jewish state. Non-Jews, I'll follow your laws. Like in Israel today. There's a whole bunch of Christians, for God's sakes. They're wonderful parts of the Jewish country. Even in America, Christians are tremendous. They're better supporters of Israel in many cases than so many of those George Soros, Bernie Sanders Jews. So, I mean, Christians are great for Israel, and in Israel too. But the Christians who are great all recognize Jewish sovereignty right now in Israel. That's all you need. And then there are people living in Israel, like people living in Al-Fahim, some of the Arab places in the Galilee, the Triangle, and they don't really recognize Jewish sovereignty. And when the left-wing Jews in Israel say, well, you have to treat them right because doesn't the Bible say you have to be good to the stranger? Well, we're talking Hebrew, not English. And it's not the stranger, it's the ger. It's talking about a ger toshav. And if they recognize Jewish sovereignty, absolutely. Arab Muslims, absolutely. And there are a lot. They don't get enough credit, and the media doesn't. The media likes to make trouble. There are a lot of Arab Muslims that would do when Trump came up with the deal of the century, so to speak. Remember Trump and his deal of the century? Part of Trump's deal of the century was to give the Arab populated areas in northern Israel over to the so-called Palestine state.
That was wrote down egg.
And at the same time, let's just see if we could just all right. And so what Trump's idea was to take the Arab populated majority areas of the Galilee and make that part of the Palestine country and make the Jewish populated areas of the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and he's going to give that to Israel. And it was similar. And the Jews didn't like it because we don't want to give up Judea, Samaria land. And the Arabs didn't want it. You know which Arabs didn't want it? The Arabs living in the Galilee. The Arabs living in the Galilee who don't recognize Jewish sovereignty in Israel, they are the ones who made the biggest stink. They don't want to come under Arab sovereignty in Palestine, so to speak. So that's the idea of Ger Toshav. So let's continue. So here this guy is saying, I'm a Ger Amalekite. I am, and we don't know whether that means he's a convert or not, but we also know that according to the Torah, according to Jewish law, not here, I don't have it set up right. Okay, right now, but according to Jewish law, an Amalekite never can be accepted as a convert into Israel. So it must mean that he's a resident alien and not a convert. It must mean that because he can't be a convert. So that's the ger he's talking about. So he tells David says, Amy Za'ata, so who are you? And the guy says, I'm the son of a ger Amalek. I'm the son of an Amalekite convert, which is a nullity, which means he's an Amalekite, or I'm the son of an Amalekite resident alien. Vayomer Elav David, and David says to him, Ech lo yareta lishloach yadcha l'shachet et Mashiach Hashem. How did you not fear to strike with your hand to destroy the anointed one of God? How dare you? How did you not fear killing God's anointed? Remember, David had the chance twice. One time he ended up cutting a piece of Saul's garment. The time that David was deep in the cave and Saul was not as deep in the cave, attending to personal matters. And David cut his garment and later showed him, I could have killed you. And then there was the other one where Saul and the camp were all sleeping. And David came and took a spear and later went and showed him, I have you spear, I could have killed you. And when David's men said, let's kill him, we'll be done with it. David said, I would never kill the anointed of God. And this guy is like looking for a reward. I brought the crown. I brought the armlet. I'm bringing you good news. You're the king, I guess. Vayikra David liachad me'anarim, vayomer, Gash Pagabo Vayakeu Vayamot. David had one of his young men come and ordered that execute this guy right away, and they killed him. They killed that Amalekite immediately. Vayomer elav David damecha al roshecha. Your blood is on your head. Your testimony is the source of your execution. Kificha anavecha limor, because your own mouth admitted, Anochi motati at Mashiach Hashem. I killed the anointed of God. And because of that, David killed him. We are told in the Midrash, as I start winding down, we are told in the Midrash, in Bereshit Rabbah, Samach Bet 62, they discuss, I'm going to take about 5 minutes, the class will end somewhere in the next 10 minutes maximum. And of course, you could always leave. I mean that respectfully, of course, but let's see if I can get in about 5 more minutes, 10 minutes max. Omar Rabbi Yudan, Rabbi Judan, like Yehuda, but it's not Yehuda, Judan, Ilule Shehamida Kadosh Baruch Hu Acherim Tachteim, God unbelievably always seems to have someone ready in place to succeed a great, great person upon that great person's passing. He does not leave us without someone worthy. If it weren't for the fact that God always ha'emid, from the word amod, stand, if it weren't for the fact that God always stands up someone new, acherim tachteim, a new person to succeed the one who just fell or died natural causes, kivar chazar ha'olam la'acharav, the entire world would fall backwards. All of history and its march forward would retreat, but for the fact that there's always someone, dichtiv, vayehi acharei mot Avraham, Rabbi Yudan quotes verses from the Torah, as it says, and it was after the death of Abraham, and right afterwards, Vayashav Yitzchak, Vayachpor Be'irot Hamayim Asher Achafru B'mei Avraham Aviv. And suddenly there was Isaac, Yitzchak, to stand in as next. Vayachri Mot Moshe Eved Hashem. And after the death of Moses, the servant of God, it says, Vayomer Hashem al Yehoshua bin Nun B'sharet Moshe Limor. God immediately turns to Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moshe. Moshe was the servant of God, and Yehoshua was the servant of Moshe. And it says, you're next. Vayhi achrei mot Yehoshua vayomer Hashem Yehuda yaleh. And after Joshua died, it says, and Yehuda, the tribe of Judah, will arise. And then they quote from our text, Vayechari mot Shaul, and after the death of Saul, David shav me'akot to Amaleki, and David returned to Tziklag from his battles with the Amalekites. Vayeshav David bet Tziklag yamim, and David was sitting many days in Tziklag, etc., Gomer, etc., etc. V'chtiv l'malam in inyan kodemitat Shmuel, and then it refers much, much earlier in the several chapters earlier, in chapter 17, 14, 15 chapters ago. V'David ben Ish Ephrati, that God already had in place a young man named David of Ephrat. In other words, he had him ready. And I'd like to play for you a song. It's not a Jewish song. It has zero Jewish content. But to me, it's a song that expresses everything. I can't think of a Hebrew song that does the job. And this does. It was sung by one of the greatest, maybe the greatest country music star of all times. Towards the very end of his career, he recently died, George Jones. And he was mulling over how all the great country singers who really established country music are dying of old age. Who's going to fill their shoes? That God Almighty always has new people ready. And as I close now for tonight, that's particularly important to someone like me who grew up in the 70s and 80s as an Orthodox rabbi, rabbinical student, rabbi. My great rabbis, ours of the generation, included, it was a generation of Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, Rav Soloveitchik. There was Rav Moshe Feinstein. There was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Avigdor Miller, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Rav Shach, Eliezer Shach. It was a generation of giants, Torah giants. And they've passed away. They reached their 80s and 90s and they've passed away. And the question becomes, who's going to fill their shoes, having lived under such giants? And what the rabbis are telling us is that after Abraham, there will be a Yitzchak. After Moshe, there's a Joshua. After the first king of Israel, who's going to fill their shoes? Someone will always be there. And in our generation too, there will always be someone to fill their shoes. And so I close tonight, just a little one stanza, and then I'm going to let it go. But just one stanza, and we did pretty well given how much material I had prepared. Let's just do a touch of it. Here we go. Who's going to fill their shoes after King Saul died? And this man wrote a song about the man who's going to come and fill their shoes.
Shalom. אין כמוכם, אין כעם ישראל. עם כל הלב, שמונה. דוד מלך, מלך ישראל, דוד מלך ישראל, דוד מלך, מלך ישראל, מלך ישראל. חי וקיים, ושמח, שמח טוב, מה זה טוב. ויהי לנו לכל ישראל. Hey! La 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 la
Melekh Yisrael, David the King of Israel, Dovid Melekh, Melekh Yisrael, But David, the King of Israel, lives and will live forever. And with that, we finish today's class. We'll continue, God willing, next week. I will take Janet's question, but I promised I'd be done by 8:10 the latest, and I met my promise. Again, may there be a refuah shalem